Charles Krauthammer just a few days ago. He joins us from our Washington bureau. Donald Gregg was U.S. ambassador to South Korea during the Bush administration and is head of the Korea Society, the leading institute monitoring U.S.-Korea relations. He joins us now from our New York studios. Ambassador Gregg, abject surrender, a second Korean war, nuclear proliferation, not a happy set of alternatives. Do you have another option?
Well, I think there is a way of working through the situation. I agree with most of what was said on your lead-in piece. One missing ingredient was China, and I'm very glad that the Clinton administration seems to be moving closer to China, because I think the Chinese can be helpful on this issue. But I think there's a way of working through this without falling into any of the traps that you mentioned.
A few specifics, please, and when you talk about the Chinese helping, in what respect and at what cost?
I think the North Koreans are a threat in three ways. They are a threat in terms of conventional armament, as they always have been. They're a threat as a proliferator, now in terms of missiles, and later perhaps in terms of nuclear weapons. And third, they are a threat because of their instability, which could cause them either to implode or to explode, lashing out. The answer, I think, is evolution to a changed economic system, a Chinese suggestion which the North Koreans have picked up on. The Chinese have maintained credibility with North Korea, even though they've recognized South Korea, and I think their advice to the North Koreans has been very helpful.
Charles, you have suggested that, first of all, this is the most dangerous foreign policy crisis confronting the Clinton administration, and you also don't seem to be of the opinion, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that there is enough time, or that the United States should be buying enough time at the expense of appearing to be weak, the kind of time that Ambassador Gregg was just talking about.
Well, exactly. Evolution is a very long process, and the building of the bomb is a very short one here. And I don't think, as the President himself has indicated, that we can afford to have a North Pacific with a nuclear North Korea.
So what are you suggesting?
Well, I think the suggestion that has been made that we set a deadline and begin with economic sanctions is probably the only conceivable route. If we wait and hope that nothing happens, we could escape for a year or two or three, but I'm not sure it's much of an escape. The nightmares are that the North Koreans start a war on the peninsula with or without nuclear weapons. Secondly, that Japan will go nuclear. And third, and perhaps even the more immediate, is the prospect, as indicated in the piece, with North Korea being this poor, desperate economically, and known to be selling missiles for cash, it will sell the bomb for cash as well. And we won't only have to worry about a nuclear North Pacific. We're going to have nuclear weapons possibly in the hands of Iran or Libya or Iraq or another of these crazy states.
Let me ask you both to focus for a moment on what always sounds so benign, and that is the word sanctions. It seems to me, Ambassador Gregg, that the problem with sanctions is they're either too tepid or too weak to produce any action, or strong enough that they may provoke the kind of action we're trying to avoid.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it was interesting to note in the UN vote recently on the Korea issue, there were 140 countries urging the North Koreans to cooperate fully with the IAEA, and 9 abstentions. One of those was China. Any sanctions we sought to bring to bear on North Korea would probably not be effective unless the Chinese went along. And I think it would be a mistake to drive China from its current rather helpful posture into a corner where it would have to side with North Korea as one of the only remaining communist countries in the world.
Charles, focus just for a moment, if you would, on the dilemma here of how to calibrate the sanctions. If you create sanctions that are tough enough to produce the kind of effect that you seek, don't you also run the risk that they're going to be tough enough to provoke the North Koreans into taking action militarily against the South?
Well, of course you run that risk, but if we are saying, as the President has said, that we will not allow the North Koreans to acquire the bomb, and if we're concerned that they may actually become aggressive if we stop them, we have to face that squarely and understand that if Kim Il-sung wants to start a second Korean war, he's in a position to do that with or without sanctions. He's done it in the past. He may do it again. His son is probably even more likely to do it. And that's a reason, I think, rather than offering to cancel our exercises with the South Koreans, which will only encourage the North to believe that we're weakening our commitment. We ought to be stabilizing and indeed increasing and strengthening our troop strength in South Korea as a signal and as a deterrent that we will not allow them to develop the bomb, and that if they decide to attack, we are prepared to stand in defense of South Korea.
I've heard it said by some military specialists that a second Korean War would be over in 60 days, but at a horrific cost. Let's hold on to that thought for one moment. I'll come back to it when we return in just a moment. Charles Krauthammer. Ambassador Gregg, I've heard it said that a second Korean War would be over in 60 days, but at a frightful cost, hundreds of thousands of lives. We'd win it. The question is whether the United States, under any circumstances at all, is prepared to fight that kind of a war.
Well, the president has said that an attack by North Korea on South Korea would, in effect, be an attack on the United States, and I think that's correct. I also think that your assessment of a second Korean War as being horrifically costly in terms of lives and treasure is also correct. You have over 1 million men facing each other across the DMZ. You have Seoul approximately as far as from the DMZ as Dulles Airport is from downtown Washington, D.C. You have massed artillery. You have Scud missiles. So once it started, it would be really a human meat grinder. The South and the United States would win. We would have to send massed infantry divisions and air units to make a credible defense, but it's much, much better to stick with deterrence and keep that from happening, and I think we can.
Charles Krauthammer, Ambassador Gregg didn't answer my question before when I asked him what price we were prepared to pay the Chinese for their assistance in this matter. Do you think the Chinese will be prepared to help stabilize that region, and at what cost do you think?
Well, China is the key. And I think that we have to be prepared to be hard-headed and even cynical, if you like, in dealing with China and say to them that we believe the North Korean nuclear program is the most important, if you like, human rights issue, or the most important issue in this region, and we are prepared to give the Chinese to give in on other issues, economic, even on human rights, because of the importance of this issue. One has to calculate that and say to the Chinese, on this issue, we will not bend, and we have to have them on board. Now, I don't think that it would be impossible to get them, because in the end, it is not in their interest to have a nuclear Korea. It is not in their interest to have a nuclear Japan, certainly, and Japan will go nuclear if Korea does.
Let me ask you a broader question, Ambassador Gregg. Why in this era when the Cold War is effectively over, with the exception of places like South and North Korea, why are we still operating with the same kinds of ground rules? Isn't it time, perhaps, to shape some new ones?
Well, I think we're moving in that direction. North Korea knows that it is in terrible economic shape. It desperately needs economic assistance from Japan, from the United States, and from South Korea. This is what is working for us. The North Koreans at this point are trying to figure out what the best deal they can get for their nuclear weapons gambit is. And I think that we ought not to scare ourselves into thinking that it's more than that.
But I'm not sure what the evidence is that this is only a gambit for all kinds of goodies that the North Koreans want. They have given no indication that they are prepared to give up this program, and we have dangled a lot of goodies in front of them. The alternative explanation, and the one which I think is rather plausible, is that Kim Il-sung wants the bomb. He wants to have that element of power and be able to threaten his neighbors, and that he may not be willing to bargain it away. Certainly, Saddam wasn't going to bargain his program away. It had to be destroyed.
Well, I think that has yet to be determined. I agree with you that it's not. He would like to have his cake and eat it too. I think our game plan is to be specific enough in terms of what we will do for him if he gives us good assurances on the nuclear issue, that he can move toward an economic evolution that will narrow the economic gaps between North and South so that when they come together, it'll be a glide landing and not a crash landing.
But right now, he's got his cake and he's eating it. He's gotten high-level negotiations with the United States. He's gotten an offer that we would cancel our exercises with South Korea. He's getting offers of diplomatic recognition, and at the same time, he's building his bomb.
Well, I think the North Koreans have not gotten as much as you just said they have. And I think the North Koreans, who are not used to the abrasions of normal intercourse with other countries, think they've given quite a lot in letting the IAEA into North Korea. And that organization had some really embarrassing things happen to it in Iraq, and it's being extremely intrusive. It's doing its job very well.
Well, they've let it in, but they haven't let it in where the plutonium is.
Well, they have let it in to an extent that's already quite helpful.
But not to us. I mean, it's the sites where the bomb is being built have been off limits to us, and that's why we're at a crisis right now.
Well, we're not sure.
That's why the president is so concerned about getting access.
Well, we're not even sure that they are building a bomb. We are fairly sure that they have enough enriched plutonium to make one or two, but we have no clear evidence of anything else they've done.
Charles, closing thought?
Well, if we're serious about proliferation, everybody talks about it as the major issue of our time. It's not going to be solved with a piece of paper signed in the UN building. It starts and ends in Korea, and if we're not going to solve it or at least be serious about it there, then all our talk about it is just empty rhetoric.
Charles Krauthammer, Ambassador Donald Gregg, thank you both very much for being with us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be back in a moment. After vote, Nightline will give you the results. That's tomorrow night on this ABC station. And that's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.